Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back. The first thing I want to tell you about this book of speeches is that I'm not going to make a speech tonight. If you were to think of a speech as a complete intellectual meal and a major speech as a banquet of thought and emotion, then please think of the remarks I'm about to make as an appetizer, or at best, a ham and cheese sandwich, probably on Italian bread. What I'd rather do is look forward to a discussion with you, selecting the subjects that you think are most relevant, and adding your own ideas to those I bring with me bound in the little book that has just been published. And it is the ideas that are relevant about that book, in my opinion. I didn't regard the speeches that are published as being extraordinary examples of well-constructed sentences or artful use of words. I thought of them as statements of the principal ideas that have impressed themselves on my work in public service since about 1974. My thought was that if I believed them significant enough to justify 2 decades of my life and probably more, then they were significant enough to put into permanent and accessible form. Beginning with my first political effort in 1974 before the old New Democratic Coalition, the NDC. I don't know how many of you remember the NDC. It was an extraordinary, some people thought exotic political group. It was super liberal, and the NDC, some people felt, should really have stood for November Don't Count, because they savaged many of their own on the way to the general election. But that's the first speech in the book. It was my first political effort. And the last is a recent speech, a tribute to Robert Kennedy. And in the course of these presentations, the book deals with many subjects, among them the proper role of government, the rule of law, economic growth as the provider of the American dream, the desiccating effect of labels and sloganeering. And that was at Yale University. I talked there about the poetry of campaigns and the prose of governance and the vast gulf between them. The role of religion, who is God indeed? Multiculturalism, Lincoln, liberty, Israel, death, and many other subjects. But one major notion, I think, runs through most of these attempts at dealing with our challenges and our opportunities, and I'd like to tell you about that before we start our discussion period. I frankly didn't notice how pronounced this one idea was through virtually all that I had done until I put this collection together and was able to see the pieces side by side, one after the other. The truth is, I had been at the loom, weaving for a long time, creating designs that occurred to me at the moment, without taking time to look at all the work that had gathered on the floor at my feet. When I extended the fabric to observe the configurations, I was struck that one distinct pattern appeared. Its outlines were sketched all the way back in the earliest reading and thinking that I can remember, struggling with words and ideas as a young person, words and ideas that I couldn't fully understand, in the Bible, the Baltimore Catechism, in Wordsworth. The outline grew more distinct as I went along. Buddha, Mohammed, Jesus, Confucius, Kierkegaard, and all the questions that followed. What is life? Why is life? What makes it all worthwhile? Who is God? Is God? Is he or she relevant to our democratic form of government? I think, frankly, most of us at one time or another deal with these questions. We don't particularly like to, but we do. For the most part, we put them aside as we struggle with all our strength and attention to overcome all the immediate challenges and threats to survival in this hectic world. But in the intervals, the questions reappear, and most of us work out our accommodations with them. I did too. Gradually, clumsily, and naively, I concluded some things. And all of this appears in the speeches. First, I concluded that the world is very complicated indeed. Its origins, its development, a tiny planet in an awesomely vast universe, so many parts, so many apparent contradictions, the eagerness for temporary delights, the yearning for ultimate justification, the difference between love and selfishness, between individuality and community. So many contradictions, so many distinctions, so many disparate parts. But then the closer I looked, the more it all seemed related. The chain of life, the water, then the vegetation evolving into new and higher forms and eventually into living creatures, humans, progressing, growing closer and closer to the spiritual. First the brain, then the intellect, the ability to think, then to think better. People coming together, first clans and then tribes and then villages and then nations, progressing in fits and starts, but overall making progress toward the light. The books had an answer for our role in all of this. What was the human to do as part of this progression? Well, the Hebrew books told us, Tikkun Olam. And the Christians had the same answer as the Hebrews, only in another language. Teilhard de Chardin wrote it best for the Christians, and he said what the Hebrew language said. We humans have a role to help advance the process of creation, to help the world along in its progress toward perfection, to make it better, to make it more sensible, to make it all that intelligence and effort can make it. Well, now I think I understand. We're on a journey from the slime of billions of years ago to the sublime still ahead of us. And I am allowed to join in the march. I'll take it, because this means I can believe in something larger than myself. Thank God. What a relief. Imagine if all I had was me. If all this world were about was my short span, my insignificant interval. If there was nothing more important than my life. No family to serve, no community to be a part of, no great mission to lend myself to, no truth larger than myself. What a horrible fate that would be. But it's not true. We're on the journey from the slime to the sublime, and I will be part of it. Well, then what do I do next? How do I participate? How do I advance the work of creation? Well, since the many pieces are interdependent in this complicated puzzle, since as many as there are and as contradictory as they first appeared, you could see after a while that they were all reliant upon one another, that it was indeed a network. Since it became clear that no man is an island, no woman, no state, no nation either, then it is clear that the pieces should all be made to interconnect in ways that create benefit by moving us up the ladder of creation to a higher, to a purer truth. We must help forge those connections. That's what it's about. We must help put it together, have it synergize, integrated, people to people, Arab to Jew, Bosnians to Serbs and to Muslims, black to white, woman to man, parent to child, worker to owner, government to all of them. We must join philosophy to the practical, the spiritual to the physical, compassion with common sense, integrate. I must come to understand that I will find my own best interest as an individual, as Jeremiah taught us, in the interest of the whole community. Now, these ideas are everywhere in my speeches. I didn't realize, as I say, until I put it together, but they're everywhere. I talk about family, which is the simple translation of the idea, sharing benefits and burdens. I talk about it in my first inaugural. I talk about it in a speech I was privileged to do at a convention in 1984. And I talk about it, if I may, in these words, approximately. First, the inaugural. I believe we can balance our lives and our society even as we manage to balance our books. We can if those who today stand on platforms built by our forebears' pain and are warmed by the applause earned by their courage remember who we are and where we came from and what we have been taught. Those who made our history taught us above all things the idea of family, mutuality, the sharing of benefits and burdens fairly for the good of all. It is an idea absolutely essential to our success, and no family that favored its strong children or that in the name of even-handedness failed to help its vulnerable ones would be worthy of the name. And no state or nation that chooses to ignore its troubled regions and people while watching others thrive can call itself justified. We must be the family of New York, feeling one another's pain, sharing one another's blessings reasonably, equitably, honestly, fairly, without respect to geography or race or political affiliation. That was at the inaugural, my first inaugural. I received a letter that I didn't pay any attention to because I didn't take it seriously. It had "Dear Governor Cuomo" written in ink, and then it had material typed, and then it was signed Richard Nixon. And I thought it was a joke, and so I threw it into the pail. And sometime later, my secretary came in and said, "Do you have the letter from President Nixon?" And I said, "What letter from President Nixon?" She said, "The letter sent by President Nixon. His office called." I said, "You mean that was really a letter from President Nixon?" She said, "Yes." And we fished through the pail, and there it was in the refuse with a tomato stain on it from an old sandwich, really the truth. And we blotted it and cleansed it and tried to restore some of its dignity. And what the letter said was that the president liked the speech. And he liked the speech because of the reference to family. And he said something to the effect that a lot of us talk about family, but the notion of the family of New York, the family of America, the family of the world, he said, is an extremely intelligent one. That had been his observation after a while. 1984, we talked about it again at the convention in these terms. The president, you might recall, President Reagan had talked about the shining city on a hill and had said, in effect, that we're in great shape. This was 1984, and most people thought we were. I didn't. We thought about deficit and debt, and I had the problem of the homeless, and I had the problem of crack, and I had the problem of AIDS. That had all happened at the end of 1982 and the beginning of 1983. Think back. 1982, all through the campaign that I had with Mayor Koch, and then Lou Lerman, there was never a word mentioned about AIDS or crack. It was amazing. And then in that fall and the early spring of 1983, all of a sudden, these three terrible plagues struck us at once. Worse homelessness than anything we had seen since the Great Depression. Crack. Every child that tried it for the first time was, one out of two of them at least, instantly addicted. And we still don't know if we can get them back. And AIDS, horror of horrors. And so we were in San Francisco, and this was the convention, and I was asked to give a keynote, and as part of the keynote, I talked about interconnectedness and integration and synergism and all of those nice ideas this way. President Reagan told us from the beginning that he believed in a kind of social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. Government can't do everything, we were told, so it should settle for taking care of the strong and hope that economic ambition and charity will do the rest. Make the rich richer, and what falls from their table will be enough for the middle class and those trying to make it into the middle class. The Republicans called it trickle-down when Hoover tried it. Now they call it supply side. It's the same shining city for those relative few who are lucky enough to live in its good neighborhoods. But for the people who are excluded, locked out, all they can do is stare from a distance at that city's glimmering towers. It's an old story, as old as our history. The difference between Democrats and the Republicans has always been measured in courage and confidence. The Republicans believe the wagon train will not make it to the frontier unless some of our old, some of our young, and some of our weak are left behind by the trail. The strong will inherit the land. We Democrats believe that we can make it all the way with the whole family intact. And we have, more than once. Ever since Franklin Roosevelt lifted himself from his wheelchair to lift this nation from its knees. Wagon train after wagon train to new frontiers of education and housing and peace. The whole family abroad, constantly reaching out to extend and enlarge that family, lifting them up into the wagon on the way. Blacks and Hispanics, people of every ethnic group, Native Americans, women, all those struggling to build their families and claim some small share of America. For nearly 50 years, we carried them to new levels of comfort, security, dignity, even affluence. Some of us are in this room today only because this nation had that confidence. It would be wrong to forget that. That's from 1984. Thank you very much. There's one place in particular where this subject of belief in something larger than yourself, and integration and synergism and connection between you and all that is to come, between here and the sublime, is most easily captured in the whole agenda of the subjects we need to deal with in this state and in most states. You have to remember, we are not allowed to deal in God. God effectively was struck from the rolls by some Supreme Court decisions a while back as far as government is concerned. And so we don't talk in terms of morality or in terms of God. But there is one area that has always struck me as the closest to what most of us would think of as morality, because it is the least self-centered, and that is the area of protection of the environment. And so in the speech on the environment to a group at the United Nations, I put it this way: just a generation ago, one of America's great national symbols, the bald eagle, was on the verge of extinction in the continental United States, a victim of what Rachel Carson called a chemical barrage hurled against the fabric of life. But fortunately, Rachel Carson's warning helped educate an entire generation to the delicate ecosystems that support us all. Today, the bald eagle has returned in New York and in the rest of America. The lesson is a reminder of what we can achieve when we approach our environment with reason and humility and a sincere willingness to do what must be done. Frankly, I think one of the most important lessons we can teach our children is that our own survival is interwoven with the survival of all the world's creatures. For that reason, protecting our environment can be an essential instruction in the most fundamental values. Democratic governments like ours in New York and the United States are not allowed to promote any theology, any religion, even any formal philosophy. What then are our ultimate values? What do we say to our children about what the government believes? What do we say to human beings about the way they ought to behave without being accused of teaching religion? Well, there is one area where the assertion of what could easily be accepted as a moral value is allowed. It is in dealing with the environment. Remember that when we act to protect the air and the water, the earth and the sky, and the life that passes through it, we're not doing these things for ourselves or even for our own families. We are protecting generations that we will never know, and generations that will never know us. It is, it seems to me, perhaps the ultimate selfless act. All of our efforts to preserve and enhance our environment demonstrate our profound reverence for the great web of being, for the generations before us who planted and preserved the earth, and for all the generations to come, all the life that surrounds us, the magnificent links of creation, reaching forward beyond us to places and to dreams that we ourselves will never reach. It is a kind of magnificent statement about our human obligation to one another, an act as intelligent as any prayer ever uttered, as beautiful as any faith ever held. That is our work today and in the days ahead. Again, in the nomination speech of President Clinton in 1992, the same theme in the last speech of tribute to Robert Kennedy, we talk about Robert Kennedy's own view of the necessity to put people together, to join the middle class and the enlightened affluent and the desperate poor, to understand the needs that we all have of dependence on one another. All through the speeches, I talk about a potential we have not come close enough yet to reaching. High aspiration that frankly embarrasses us when we read the morning headlines describing barbarism abroad and even here. It's difficult to write speeches and deliver them, to talk to the people you're serving, constantly trying to get people to see a possibility, broader, grander, more significant than many people even had contemplated. But then to be dragged back down to earth with a headline that describes people savaging one another, overseas or here, racial strife, bias-related violence, frightened Americans quarreling over scraps in a period of economic difficulty. Indeed, the gap between our soaring hopes and the often grubby reality of our sweaty and uncertain lives occasionally produces criticism. More than once I've been told that the vision you propose, Mario, sets our sights at goals we do not reach. You disappoint us. I am told that unless we can achieve those goals, we ought not to encourage our people to dwell on them as possibilities. Well, I have only this to say in response to that. Emerson, I think, was right. We ought to hitch our wagons to a star. And personally, I would prefer to struggle for the next level, however apparently unattainable, than settle for convenient complacency and the weariness of life without a dream. I know, finally, that I will never be able to write the speech I want most to write. The speech that says triumphantly, we have made it to the top of the mountain. We have found the very best that is in us. We have traveled all the way to the sublime. Because when finally in this process of constant escalation upward, and finally we improve our intellects and our civility and our understanding sufficiently so that there is no more striving before us. Because finally when we reach that omega point, there will be no need for speeches or for sadness. Until then, the only path I know is to keep reaching for that star, gradually, although perhaps imperceptibly, reducing the distance between us and ultimate civilization. Our state motto has said it for us for more than 200 years. The state motto, Excelsior, ever upward. That's what the speeches are all about. I hope you will enjoy some of them. Now let's talk. Thank you for listening. I think they've left me to my own devices, so do you have my, yes, sir.
Governor, think back 12 years ago, why did you want to run for governor? And secondly, do you think you've been successful in the goals you set for yourself?
Well, I've been much more successful than I thought I would be. I never expected to win the first time. So I've been very, very successful. I think one of the points that I'm trying to make here this evening, and that is implicit and explicit in the speeches, is that it is impossible for me to believe that I could ever be satisfied with any of the progress that we have made as a state, because my whole approach to life is to push the bar constantly higher and beyond our reach. And my theory being, and maybe it is a throwback to old-fashioned Christian guilt, that ever since concupiscence, our obligation is to make ourselves as good as we can be, and we'll never get adequately close even to the level we should attain. So, am I satisfied? The answer is no. I guess it was Soren Kierkegaard who said this, and it's wonderful. The Christian ethic, Kierkegaard believed, was written deliberately too severe. Really. It was never expected you would, but that's why we go to confession every week. Yom Kippur, you do once a year, you atone. But the Christians, we go, or the Catholics, we go every week. We sin 7 times a day, and we know that. And so the aspiration of the Christian is, according to Kierkegaard, deliberately too severe. That's why some people set their watches ahead a half hour. And that's the way I live. My watch is constantly set a half hour to 45 minutes ahead to be sure that I'm on time. If you wanted to know how has this estate dealt with the last 11 years that I have been governor, then I must confess to you a frustration. I believe we have probably a better record of specific accomplishments in almost every area than any administration in the state's history. And I think I can prove that to you, and I will try without being tedious about it. However, I don't believe there's any real sense of that. Why not? Because people don't know what state government is. You all know what the city government is because they pick up the garbage and they put the police on the streets and they're there to harass you or protect you every day. You know what the federal government is because the president's on television, constantly, endlessly. The state government is the death penalty. What does the state government do for you? Think about it. I know, but you don't know. And I'm not telling you. Now let's take what the state government has done. Let me just give you some examples to indicate to you that there is some basis for frustration in all of this. What does the state do? We have committed $50 billion to infrastructure development. That's roads and bridges and schools, and the things without which we cannot survive as a state, to the highway system. We have made the highway system the safest system in recorded history. 3 years in a row, the record has gotten better. That means fewer lives lost. You can count them in the thousands now of lives we've saved. How? By fixing the roads and bridges. Nobody notices that. They curse the delays that occur when you see those orange and black signs. As a matter of fact, I'm no dummy. I'm not the world's smartest guy, but I'm from Queens, and I'm no dope either. And what I did is I changed all the signs. When we're doing the construction work now, my name is off them. Until we open the road. Then the name goes up, Mario M. Cuomo. Make it larger there, Mario M. Cuomo. You know all about asbestos. Absolutely. Did you know about Stuyvesant High School? Oh, really? What do you know about Stuyvesant High School? We just built a new one. It is the greatest of its kind in the world, and it cost $127 million. There's nothing like it anywhere. We built Riverbank State Park on top of a sewer plant. Nothing's ever been done like it. 78 acres of park, $115 million. We're building a railroad between Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Manhattan. Did you know, part of the New York program, $1.6 billion, 6,000 jobs, Penn Station, Grand Central, Kennedy Airport. $7 billion in New York. You never heard of it. You heard of the death penalty. You know about the speeches. I'm constantly getting people say, you see, upstate Republicans will say this about the speeches. Yeah, I read the speeches, grumble, grumble, not bad, but not bad. But I never heard anybody say he was terrific at doing the governance. How would you know? Of course you never heard that, because these are arcane subjects to most of the people in the state. What do you know about community reinvestment bill that people were picketing about today? What do you know about mental health? Do you know that this state gives more per capita to mental health than any state in the union by far? We don't give enough. Do you know that we invented the decade of the child and spent $4.5 billion more, everything from perinatal to postnatal? We have special insurance programs for children so we can subsidize their insurance premiums. You never heard of it. Matilda spends day after day around the state, as we affectionately say in Queens, schlepping. You tell them in Utica you're schlepping, they thought that you had something in your mouth when you spoke. What would you want to talk about? What would you want to talk about? Would you want to talk about prisons? I am sad that I have built more prison cells than any governor in history. And I'm sad about it, that probably will be somewhere on my tombstone. I don't like it. I had to do it. Why? Because we have these foolish laws that say, they're held over from the Rockefeller era, that even if you're nonviolent, if you're involved in a drug-related crime, you have to do time. Sounds tough, right? What's the point of it? The person is nonviolent and addicted. You put him in a cell for 3 years. The cell costs you $130,000, $32,000 to maintain it. After 3 years, you empty him out, still addicted, leave the cell door open because he'll be back any time now. You can spend $15,000, cure them of the addiction, try at least to make them productive. But you can't get that done in this state. Why? Oh, because people are afraid that it'll sound soft. Doesn't sound soft, it sounds intelligent. Anybody that's listening certainly would to this audience if we were able to explain it. But because we've not been able to do that and you can't get the legislature to move, you have to build prison cells. We built more than anybody. The state police are at 4,000. That's the highest number they've ever had. And so on and so forth. So do I think that I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish? No. Have we accomplished a great deal? A tremendous amount, any way you measure it. Our 13 centers for advanced technology. Silicon Valley doesn't have anything like it. Route 28 isn't even in the same park. We have every targeted high-tech capacity you can think of that's needed for the global economy. Fiber optics, advanced materials processing, parallel computing, now telecommunications. We're the telecommunications capital of the world, and we'll be bigger at that. 13 centers of advanced technology, great universities like SUNY Buffalo. We took the earthquake center away from California, stole it in the middle of the night with a $5 million down payment they didn't think we could make because the legislature wasn't in town. Now we have the earthquake center that studies earthquakes, and they have the earthquakes. No, don't applaud they have the earthquakes. You can applaud that we have the earthquake center. Better this than the other way around. So we have accomplished a great deal. Have you accomplished, Mario, what you wanted? No. Why? Because I want people to love one another. I don't want to see Crown Heights. I don't want people to misunderstand. I want them to understand that you have to take care of those little kids in my old neighborhood, the 103rd Precinct, South Jamaica, where they empty children out into the streets now, surrounded by pimps and prostitutes, every kind of deterioration. 2, 3, 4 years old, as I say in one of the speeches and said in nominating President Clinton. Children growing up in my old neighborhood who become familiar with the sound of gunfire before they've ever heard an orchestra. I want the rest of the community to understand that they are our children, even if they're a different color, and that they must be saved or our family perishes. But we don't. We want to legitimate drugs. We want to give vouchers to the private schools, which takes money out of the public schools. So no, of course, I'm not satisfied. I don't believe that the country now is a country that believes profoundly in the idea of family. Let me just conclude with this and answer this question, because I want to answer as many as I can. I tried this because maybe it's a question of advancing age. I want desperately to understand things. I don't know about you, but I would like to understand this world a little bit better before I leave it. It is a terribly confusing thing, especially when so many bright people for so many thousands of years have so many different opinions about it. But I want to believe. I'm an old-fashioned Roman Catholic. You know what an old-fashioned, that doesn't mean you're good. That means you're a sinner, but you recognize it. The old-fashioned Roman Catholic has the Apostles' Creed. Anybody here remember the Apostles' Creed? You can put it on a card, and you put it in your pocket. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven. It says everything. It's this big. Put it in your pocket. Your wife leaves you. Your son ignores you. You lose the election. The IRS called you up. You say, where is God? Whoop, you whip out the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven. Ha, and then you're refreshed. You're reaffirmed. It's nice. Have the Baltimore Catechism. Who is God? God made me to know him, to love him, to serve him in this world, and to be happy with him forever in the next. Ah, gee. And I was wondering, who is God? Why he made me? It's all there in an answer, 47 words. Try doing that as an American. What is an American? What do I believe in as an American? What are my fundamental values? What are the marks of my character as an American people? How would you describe it? What are the fundamental values? Well, let's see. Opportunity. This is a place where we give you the chance to make it on your merits. Mama and Papa will attest to that. Thank God. Your own merits. The sweat of your brow, the work of your back and your hands and your mind, you can make it here. Absolutely. Generation after generation, you can make it all the way to multi-millions. You can have power, affluence. I'll give you that opportunity. Liberty. No place has ever managed the kind of freedom we give here for 200 years and still kept a reasonably well-ordered society. Liberty, absolutely. We'd rather you escaped responsibility than got punished for a crime you didn't commit. That's how much we cherish liberty. Responsibility. Yeah, we're pretty good at that. We're pretty good at that. You know, we make you live up to the law in this state. I'm not happy about all those jail cells, but nobody can tell me this isn't a tough state when it comes to law and order. We believe in that. You're on welfare in this state, you have to work. Did you know that? People talk about welfare reform. We've had a work requirement for welfare. Why? Because we believe in responsibility. We believe if you can't work, we'll take care of you because we're very charitable. So that's opportunity, liberty, responsibility. Pretty good, Mario. The fourth, family, community. We believe in helping one another, sharing benefits and burdens. Well, I strive for that. I don't think we're quite there yet. Not at a time like this. Time like this is very hard to get any part of the population to say, I'm willing to give up something for another part of the population. Why? Because everybody's scared to death. Senior citizens say, don't come at me. You know, now you raise the Social Security, you're coming after Social Security, you keep saying entitlements. I don't know what you're going to do with health care. What are you going to do about long-term care? The business people, you raise my taxes, you raise my taxes. You see a lot of individuality now. Reagan was individuality. Reagan was macho individualism. What Reagan said is, hey, look, just the best you're entitled to is they should get at it. Nobody should build an obstacle. And, you know, make it on your own. John Wayne, terrific. Yeah, it's great. That's great. Make it on your own. But what if I was born to a wheelchair? What if I'm that 2.5-year-old child emptied out into the streets of South Jamaica? Make it on my own? Surrounded by pimps and drug addiction? Do I have the same shot you had, Mario? With a good mama and a good papa who taught you, sent you to school, protected you, sent you to church, with a brother and a sister who helped to raise you, never being hungry, never going without, secure always in your love, educated in a good school, never confronted by anybody with crack. Do you have the same shot that Mario had? Of course not. But make it on your own. Applaud. That's John Wayne. Okay, I'll give you that. That's where we are now. I don't think it's right. So am I satisfied? No. I don't think we're as good as we should be. We are the strongest people in the world. We are the most blessed people in the world. We have everything you could ask for. Natural resources of all kind, the people of the whole world sending us their most talented, aggressive, ambitious, and productive people. We should be doing it better than we're doing it. So no, I'm not satisfied that I have done my job well enough. Yes?
On Wednesday, the 22nd, President Clinton will be unveiling a health care plan. I want to know how you think it will affect New York City in particular, especially in the hospital.
Nobody knows for sure. The health care, how will President Clinton's health care plan affect New York City and New York State? Nobody knows for sure. First of all, what must be done with health care nationwide? You have 36, 37 million people, maybe 2 million of them in this state, without insurance. Some of them are working people. Some of them choose not to have insurance. Some of them are poor and cannot afford insurance. What is the problem with not having insurance? Well, it means that you don't get any health care. That's not true. Everybody gets health care. I was raised without insurance. We were raised without a doctor. All the children in my house were born at home. My mother didn't have a doctor. She had a midwife. So we didn't need a hospital or a doctor for that. But I got stitched up over my lip when I ran into an automobile's handle. Remember, the handles used to be on the outside? And broke my wrist. And you went to the emergency room at Queens General. They still do. They go to the emergency room. So they get health care. Yeah, but it's the most expensive kind. It's not good kind. They don't get primary care. They don't get preventive care. If they're a child having a child, they don't go when they're pregnant, so you don't get prenatal. So the fact that people are uninsured means, number one, that you're not getting quality health care, and the health care you're getting is too expensive. When that person uninsured goes to an emergency room, it costs you $80. If it was Medicaid, it would cost you less than a quarter of that. All right? So, one, we have to get everybody insured. Number two, you have to reduce costs. Why? Because if you don't do anything with the current system, healthcare system, and the costs continue to grow at the rate they're growing now, you will be bankrupt as a nation in about 2012, 2011. Everybody agrees to that. That's how fast the costs are going up. The biggest problem you have in New York City with your budget is Medicaid cost growth. The biggest problem we have in New York State with the budget is Medicaid cost growth. So you have to bring down the costs. What's the problem with costs? All sorts of problems, a lot of them administrative. In this state, we're saving 28 to 40. Last year was 28 million. We started partway through the year. This year it'll be $40 million just by computerizing the stream of paper that goes into the hospitals. What do you have to do? You have to get them insured. You have to reduce those costs with administrative changes. You have to do another very, very big thing that we're doing already in the state. Move down to primary care levels. Do more primary care, more prevention, more of the old-fashioned wisdom. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's as simple as that. If we get to that baby who's having babies, that 14-year-old girl, that 15-year-old, first of all, if you can talk her into not getting pregnant, that would be the best thing to do. But if she's pregnant and she's going to have that child, and you can get there first, or to any woman who is having a child, if you get there early enough, you can avoid all sorts of serious illnesses in that child. The record shows very clearly that if you examine the child when it is first born early enough, you can prevent all sorts of terrible disabilities that otherwise might occur that could be not just arrested, but prevented if you got to the child first. So we must have more primary care, more general practitioners, more family doctors. Now 70% of the doctors are at the exquisite end in acute care. That's very, very expensive, and we're pleased to have all that expertise when you need an operation. But if we had more of them at the front end, you'd need fewer of them at the acute end. It's as simple as that. That's going to cost us a lot of money to do primary care. Why? You have to help the hospitals. You have to give people scholarships to encourage them to go into primary care. Why? Because primary care makes less money than an exquisite specialist. But we have to make that conversion. more doctors at the early stage, more prevention, more traditional old-fashioned medicine, more holistic approach. Remember, it wasn't long ago you said holistic, they thought you were smoking marijuana, right? Holistic, that was a California word. Holistic, what is it? Holism, oh man, that's like Zen, right? No. Holistic means you use your common sense. You eat right, you do everything right, you exercise, you get rid of tension. We need more of that. What will the president's plan be? We're not sure exactly what form it will take. It will have networks of providers. It will have competition. It will have managed care. What is managed care? Managed care is instead of you going to Dr. Schultz and you're picking out the doctor and doing it just you and Dr. Schultz and paying whatever his bill is, you belong to a group of doctors or an HMO, and you go in and you pay them, instead of fee, you pay them, for each bit of service, you pay them one fee for the whole year. And then they do whatever you need. And some of them give you your own doctor, and some of them send you to other doctors, but they take care of your problems in an HMO. There'll be a lot of that. There'll be a lot of these networks competing with one another. It'll be very, very complicated. Here's all you have to know for the time being. Nothing will happen right away to affect your life. The plan will be announced on September 22nd, and then the congressional hearings will start. There will be hearings after hearings. This is a good thing, because right now the public does not know, and will not know on September 22nd, what the plan is all about. You can't expect busy New Yorkers or busy people from Kansas to understand all these complicated words like networks and how it's actually going to work, and am I going to be able to pick my own doctor, and what about long-term care? Probably won't do a whole lot with long-term care, and that's the biggest part of our problem. What are we going to do there? And what about if I change my job? And what about if the employer says, oh, now you're going to make me pay 80% of the insurance policy, which the Clinton plan presumably says, oh, now I'm going to lay you off, because rather than pay 80% of the insurance for you, I'd rather do without you. Now you're going to have question after question like that. Don't panic. What we're going to do in this state is go from one end of the state to the other, explaining this plan, discussing it, talking to groups like you, getting your questions. By the time we vote, by the time Pat Moynihan, who is the key figure in the entire Congress on this bill as head of Senate Finance, it won't happen without him. By the time Pat Moynihan makes a vote, we will know in this state what it's all about, and we will have a chance to express our opinions. I promise you that. It won't be done by your politicians. We'll see to it that this state knows. We'll come at you every way we can, with literature, on television, in person. We'll be all over this state trying to educate New Yorkers as to the complexities of the plan. I'll conclude with only this. We have no choice but to do something. There's no possibility that the president will mention his plan on September 22nd and then the whole thing will be put in a drawer. No way. Not just because his political life is, dependent upon it, but because this nation's survival is dependent upon it. You cannot afford to continue the current healthcare situation. Period. You can't afford it. So we're going to have to change it. We're going to have to find ways to reduce costs. Final note. Do you know what single payer is? All right. I'm going to give you a prediction. I'm not saying this is good, but just a prediction just for fun. Single payer is a Canadian system. In effect, what single payer is, the government pays everything. Socialism, my God, can you imagine trying to say that 15 years ago, what the AMA would have done to you? They would have killed you, right? There would have been a big thing in the New York Times, socialized medicine, communist, 20 years ago, maybe 25, communist. Well, now everybody's talking about it, even some doctors. Single pay is the government pays for everything, and you find a tax that is fairly distributed across the whole population, and what the population gets back is, I don't have to worry about anything. No more hard questions. When I'm sick, I go and get my care, period. I don't pay a penny. Now, how do they do that? Well, they do it the way they do it in Canada. You have a value-added tax, in effect, that most people, you don't even know where it is. Why? Because it's at every stage of the production. You make something, the first stage, it's 2%, then another 2%. By the time it gets to you, you're paying 12, 13% more. It's like a big sales tax, but you don't know it because it's in the product. Now, that may happen, a value-added tax. That's what they have in Canada. They have it in a lot of Europe. That's the way you would finance single-payer. Right now, only about 20% of the American people want a single-payer system. Here's what I think is going to happen. As you begin to explain these other systems, they're going to be so complicated, people are going to say, hey, please, please, do me a favor, tax me, take the money, just tell me I don't have to worry anymore. I want to live to be 120, you should pay all the bills. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Sir. Say about Crown Heights. Well, he had nothing to do with the acquittal of Yankel Rosenbaum. Let's talk about Crown Heights. I'll tell you why I support Mayor Dinkins. First of all, race is the wrong way to decide the issue. There's no question about it. Nobody should vote for me because I am white. Nobody should vote against me because I am white. And I think we all agree to that it would be wrong to determine this election on the basis of race. Are there racial implications? Of course there are. But they're not desirable and they're not right. Well, how do you deal with it? Well, race is a superficial and unintelligent criterion for an election. So is sex. So I think is sexual orientation. So is religion. The fact that a person is a Jew or a Catholic ought to have nothing to do with your selection. But history reveals that things like ethnicity and these superficial characteristics do play a role. How do you defeat that, or at least reduce its impact? By supplying more intelligent criteria. You have Marlin, you have Giuliani, you have Dinkins. 3 choices, 2 Republicans. Marlin, incidentally, is going to impress more and more people. Wait till you see this guy. Very smart. I mean, he's from Queens, very articulate. No, that wasn't a, that wasn't a causal relationship I was suggesting. It was just a lovely coincidence. But you got Marlin, you got Giuliani, and you have Dinkins, okay? What you should do, and this is what I have done about all 3, is say, let's have intelligent characteristics. Now I want to know about the fellow individually. Does he have experience? Dinkins wins. Does he have intelligence? Well, I mean, Dinkins, I know because I've seen him, has worked his way up on his own. It wasn't easy for him. It's not easy for any black person in this society. Became a lawyer, became a very good one, became an assemblyman, did it very well, became a Marine, did it very well. He has a good record. Became a borough president, did it very well. City clerk before that, did it very well. Has been mayor for 4 years. Well, let's discuss it. Let's discuss it. Now watch this. Here you're going to have your chance. Didn't do it well. All of my life, it seems, since I was young, I've had people, certainly since I've been in public life, I've had people saying to me, why can't we get Tony the cop back on the beat? Do you remember, Mario? Tony the cop was there, come past the grocery store, had his stick. Forget about it, boy. He would take you by the wrist, bing, on the knuckles. Woo! That, straighten you out for a lifetime. One shot of Tony's stick, or in the shins, Just seeing the cop there was terrific. And so New Yorkers say, we want the cop back on the beat. Dinkins said, I will put safety first on the streets, 6,000 more police. People are arguing with the numbers. There is no question, because I've seen the budget, I know how much we're spending, thousands more police and the cop on the beat, which everybody wanted for a generation. Community policing. Now you've got the cops on the beat. Now, taxes. He froze your real property taxes if you're lucky enough to live in a house. If you live in an apartment, it should work its way down to the rent, depending on whether you're controlled or stabilized. But if you live in a house, where a lot of people in Queens do, and a lot of people in Brooklyn, a lot of people in Staten Island, a lot of people in the Bronx, and a lot of people in Manhattan, Your real property taxes are frozen for 4 years. Go to Nassau, they're getting killed with real property tax. Go to Suffolk, go anywhere in the state. The truth, the real property taxes are probably artificially depressed in this. Thank God I live in a house. Okay? He froze them for 4 years. The budget. How is he with the budget? Balanced on time 4 years in a row. What are you talking about? His record. Crown Heights, let me tell you something about Crown Heights. We did the report. You know how critical it was. It was an honest report. We told the truth, and I'm glad we did. Somebody had to tell the truth. And to some extent, it hurt the mayor because his police, didn't do the right thing. Everybody admits that. It also helped the mayor because the really tough charge against him was he deliberately held back the police and this Jewish community was victimized. And it's now clear that that didn't happen. But let's remember something. Crown Heights was a disaster. No question. Everybody admits that. But you could have a Crown Heights every night. You could have had a Crown Heights recently when another car with another Jewish gentleman hit another black. No Crown Heights. You could have had it after Rodney King. This was after Crown Heights. Didn't happen. And the people who condemned Dinkins in Crown Heights, just a minute, applauded him, including Mr. Giuliani. So what is it about his record that you're telling me is so bad? Please help me. Go ahead. And then there was a report, which most people applauded, especially the Hasidim of Crown Heights, who called me. I did not do the report. I ordered it. Mr. Gigenti did it, and it was hands-off as far as I was concerned because I promised that. And the report describes exactly what you described. And the report describes how it happened, that the city did not use the plan that they were designed to use, that the city's police were telling the mayor, this is the best we can do.
Who are the police?
Well, hold, that is very, why don't you stand up, sir, so I can see you? I can't see you. I can't see you. Shh.
You're right, Mr. Governor. It wasn't the mayor's fault that there was an acquittal, but it is the mayor's fault that he would not talk about an acquittal on the basis that the jury system is sacrosanct, except when he doesn't like the verdict, whether it's
there you
in
go.
Giants or in California, then he has what to say. It's the inconsistency. That's what we don't like.
Okay, well then. Now, all of you who are applauding, and I understand your position, and nobody has spoken on the subject more than I, that's what the report is. I mean, nobody has the commitment I have to telling the truth on Crown Heights. Nobody risked as much as I did. So I know what you're talking about. Now, hold it. Wait, now you have a great deal of resentment, sir. Let me ask you another question, please, because this is an intelligent discussion, and I welcome it. Aside from Crown Heights, can you tell me what there is about his record that you find faulty? Shh. You know, it's fascinating to me that you are taking, let's say, 2 incidents in a record of 4 years. No, just a minute. 2 incidents in a record of 4 years. Now, hold it 1 minute, please. If you did that with any other politician in America, nobody would ever win re-election. If you went to any major city and said, if you fail on 2 specific occasions to keep the order the way I want you to, Chicago, Their schools have not opened, 5 out of 10 years have not opened on time. If you use that criteria, and it raises a question, why the severity of this test in the case of this man? Now, he had Crown Heights. He said it didn't go well. We did the report. Thereafter, the people who condemned him at Crown Heights applauded him over and over for keeping the peace. How do you explain that? Mr. Giuliani said he kept the peace after Rodney King. He's got to be congratulated. What are you saying about that? What you're saying is, look, I'm so angry about what happened in Crown Heights. That's enough. He's finished. Okay, it's a democracy. You're free to say that. I'm free to question it. I'm free to say to you, even if I agree with you on Crown Heights, the Korean situation, are you telling me that that should be my measure of whether this man should be in charge of the children, in charge of the hospitals, in charge of the police, in charge of everything? Really? Maybe that's why he's losing at the moment. No, who said racial harmony? Who said racial harmony? Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. No, look, I understand what you're saying. You asked me what my judgments were. I have made my judgments. You see, and I think you're doing something else, and Lord knows we're free to do it. You're making the only question Dinkins. What about the others? Don't you need any evidence of capacity on the part of the others? Any proof that they can do something? No. You see, to do it only from anger or disapproval, but there's a certain rationality to that, but it leaves the picture incomplete, which is frankly not characteristic of New Yorkers. New Yorkers can be very, very tough. They're also very complete. I want to know you did this wrong, but you want to replace him. I want to know what you have done right. Okay, and let's look at that too. All I'm saying is you wanted to know where I am. I've told you. I've given you Dinkins' record. It's a very, very good one. I think it is a very, very good one for keeping peace. If I concede to you Crown Heights and the Korean grocer, and I know how difficult these judgments are. I mean, I've been in the middle of it. I get this kind of thing myself with some regularity. 8 days after I was governor, I got it. 8 days after I was governor, I was in the middle of Sing Sing with 16 hostages being held by the guards, and was there for 57 hours with guards saying, if you don't give us what we want, we'll send the testicles of one of the inmates, or the testicles of one of the guards out on a plate. And we had to make judgments as to how to keep the peace, and we got lucky, and it worked out very well. But you're telling me that if I weren't lucky, if I had made the wrong judgment or something terrible had happened, that would have been the end of my career. That's what you're saying, in effect. And maybe that gives me a special sympathy and understanding here. I was fortunate. I could just as easily have been unfortunate. I could have had Attica. I didn't, thank God. But who knows whether that's luck. If I had, would that have proven that I wasn't capable of being governor? With all the evidence that I would suggest to you that after 11 years of being governor, at least I've proven I can do it adequately well. Are you telling me if that one event went wrong, you would condemn me and I wouldn't have had the chance to serve? That doesn't strike me as right. But I understand. What else on Crown Heights do you want to know? What should the governor have done? What do you think I would have done? That's good observation. That's a good observation. Let me tell you, I think the mayor would have handled it differently if he had a second chance at it. Forget about the reaction of the people. I think from what the report says, that the basic error in the long run was the mayor saying, look, you're the experts. You understand this arcane business of dealing with mobs. You know, it's not just as easy as saying, get tough. There's a whole science to this. People study, the police people go to school to study how to control a mob, how to encircle them, whether to use horses, whether not to use horses. It's not just a, impulse of your macho and your courage and get out there and give them hell. It's not like that. You have to know what you're doing. And what the mayor did here, I think, is what an intelligent person would do. And he said, I have Lee Brown, I have all these experts. They're telling me they know how to do it. What happened on the second day, as I understand it, is that somebody said, the second or third day, they're not using the plan that was in the book. And then somebody looked it up and said there was a plan and they're not using it. And that's when they went to that plan. No question it was a mistake. No question it was a mistake by the police. No question that the mayor has to accept responsibility, and he did. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about my speeches, incidentally, just before we leave? Go ahead, yes. Yeah. Right. Why didn't I run for president? Why did I not run for president? You mean it's all, there's perfect logic here. You didn't think you did a good job as governor, you may as well take a shot at president. I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. I'll tell you the truth. This is a reminder that president could have been easier than in 1984, I made the speech, and it got a lot of publicity, and people started talking about the presidency. I think if you're the governor of the state of New York, that's almost automatic. If you're governor of the state of New York, you know who that is? That's Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt. That's Grover Cleveland. That's Dewey. That's Harriman. Did I ever tell you the story about being introduced to the president? President Reagan. This reminds me, I have to tell you this. It's God's honest truth. Stop me. If you heard this story, shake your head and I'll stop it right away. About 1985, I guess, Pat Moynihan came, and said, Governor, does President Reagan know you? And I said, well, not so that I could say we're intimate. I've met him, but, he doesn't really. He said, well, he should know you. You're the governor of the state of New York. He said, that's Harriman, that's Cleveland, that's Roosevelt, that's Dewey. He should know you. I said, well, all right, he should know me. He says, there's a party at the White House. This is the true story. Party at the White House, a few weeks. I want to introduce you. I said, okay, I'll be there. And I went with my tuxedo. And Pat was there, Pat standing there. And Reagan was there. And at just the appropriate moment, Reagan was free on the other side of the room, and Pat took me by the elbow and he said, this is it, let's go. And he kind of pushed me across the floor, and I got up to the president, and I stood up, and Moynihan said, Mr. President, I would like to, and before he could get my name out of his mouth, God's honest truth, President Reagan kind of cocked his head, gave that wonderful smile, and said, you don't have to introduce us. I know Lee Iacocca well. That's the God's honest truth. Swear. It's the truth. So, wait. See. Now, for one terrible instant, they're surged up from the most profound recesses of my psyche, the inevitable response. It got to my throat, it got to here, it got to my lip. I bit it off, because I was going to say, I know, Mr. President, to some people, we all look alike. But I never said it. Anyway, so they think about New York, they think about president. 84, 88, the question came up. I was not interested. Why? I didn't think that it was for me. I mean, you had better candidates. Mike Dukakis came to me, said he wanted to run. I said, look, if you're looking for an ethnic from the Northeast who's been a governor and been a good governor, you were there first. You're shorter, but you were there first. You do. So Mike did it. This time, for the first time, Matilda and I took it seriously. For the first time, because we were first in the polls, and the polls were saying you should do it. And some friends came and said, look, Mario, you really ought to look at this. We've supported you. We think you could help us down there. And this time we looked at it. and I think I announced this publicly, after about 5 weeks of looking at it, we said, we will do this if I can get a budget from the Senate Republicans. Now, why is getting a budget for the state important? You think, I'm sorry? It's not an excuse. Yeah, it's not an excuse. Here's what it is. If they didn't give me a budget on time, which they did a few years ago, held up the budget, it virtually destroyed our ratings. All that means is, the interest rate goes way up. It's bad for you when Standard & Poor's and Moody's reduces your ratings. You still borrow, but it costs you more money to borrow, and it shouldn't. Anyway, it's a bad thing for the state. If they had not given me a budget, if I had announced for president and they slowed up the budget, which they would have done guaranteed, here's what would have happened. Number one, you would have gotten hurt. The state would have gotten hurt, and badly hurt. And that's wrong, because I'm the governor. Number two, it would have made the campaign impossible. I would have been going to Pennsylvania saying, I know how to save this country, and they'd show a New York Times headline that says, state loses ratings, Republicans say, where the hell are you? You don't have a budget. It would have been impossible. Now, the public didn't understand that, but I understood it. Number one, it would have been a forfeiture and abandonment of my responsibility. Number two, as a practical matter, you couldn't have run anyway. And they knew that. That's why they did it. Now, why they didn't want me to run doesn't make any sense to me, frankly. They would have been rid of me, one way or the other. No, really. They let him run. If he loses, he's dead, because, once you lose, you're finished. And if he wins, he's down there. We'll tell him we're nice guys. He should remember us. And someday, I'd meet them, and they'd be taken over to me by a senator. And I'd get their name wrong, But that was it. It was as simple as that. There was no budget. Now, I'll tell you another thing that happens. If you don't run for president in this country, after 12 people think you should, then immediately the rumors start. It's a wonderful place. This is a tough town, baby. This is a tough country. Must be the mafia. Why did you say it's the mafia? Why didn't the guy run? Wouldn't you run if you had a chance like him? Well, I don't know. Maybe he just doesn't want to run. What, are you crazy? He's obviously ambitious. Don't you see how hard he works to be governor? Gives all those speeches. Sure, the guy wants to be president. Maybe it's colon cancer, God forbid. Yeah. The one thing I never heard, and this really bothers me, I never heard anybody say, maybe he's got a girlfriend. Yes.
Governor, in terms of your philosophy of taking care of the whole American family and all your experience in government, how does one make the distinction between what the federal government should do versus the state versus the city?
I think the first question for government is, what should government do at any level? And I think government, I think Lincoln's definition is the best, and I refer this a number of times in the speeches. What Lincoln said is, government is the coming together of people to do for themselves collectively what they could not do as well or at all individually. Okay, that makes sense to me. I translated it once, look, you should have all the government you need, but only the government you need. What government don't you need? If the private sector can do it as well, government shouldn't do it. Government is no good at running things. Government should run only what it must run. Armed forces, obviously. Some roads and bridges, most roads and bridges, because it would be very hard to get them done privately, although you can do that in some cases. Nice area. Schools. Should government have schools, or should it all be private? Well, I'm a strong believer in the public school system as a synthesizer, as access, especially in this era where education is becoming more and more important. I want the government to assure that every person has the opportunity to educate himself or herself to the level needed to survive and even to succeed gloriously. So that means public education. That's definitely a place for government. Law enforcement, definitely a place for government. Now, there are a lot of questionable areas. If wherever in my government in New York State, I can get somebody private to do it, I do it. We own Stewart Airport in the Hudson Valley. We own the Republic Airport out on Long Island. I could staff that with the Department of Environmental Conservation, the people who fly our helicopter and plane, who will fly Matilda and me home tonight. I could have at Stewart Airport and Republic Airport, Department of Environmental Conservation, State of New York, all public employees. And when I'm running for office, they put on a little pin, vote for Cuomo. You know, you could do that. You could make them public. We don't. We run those places privately. We rent automobiles privately. I'm trying to sell the World Trade Center. It's a little bit difficult right now. But we've been trying to sell the World Trade Center. I have invited insurance companies for years. People say that the Medicaid system doesn't work. You know, the Medicaid system is a waste. You shouldn't have government in this business. I said, terrific. Show me private people. Get Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. You want to come and bid for the work? I'll listen to you. Ronnie Lauder does a book on privatization. He talks about Kennedy and LaGuardia. I brought in Ronnie, Steve Savas, that whole group. I worked with Steve when I was on the Vanden Heuvel Commission. I said, forget all the jazz, all the ideology, all the labels. It's all a lot of baloney. I'll sell the airport. Get me a buyer. Get me the guy from Heathrow. Kennedy, LaGuardia, I'll talk to the mayor right now. OTB, we're selling. The mayor wants to sell it. I want to sell it. I'm getting Naira to buy it. So that's number one. Government should do only what you can't get the private sector to do, okay? Only where you need government. There is no virtue in big government. You need the government you need. Some poor people will not be taken care of by all the churches, all the synagogues, all the mosques, all the philanthropists, all the rich people. Government's going to have to help some of the poor people, okay? All right. As to federal and state, what happened, and this is very complicated, let me try to do it in shortened form. What happened in the Reagan-Bush years is the following. Reagan first decided he wanted to shrink programs to places like New York. Do you remember he wanted to disallow the deductibility of the state and local taxes? That would have been a massive tax increase for New York State and other states that have high local taxes. He wanted to spend his money on defense and tax cuts, basically. Defense and tax cuts, period. And do very little else with the money. Defense and tax cuts. His whole idea was we should withdraw from programs for people. And he did in education, in health care, and all those other things. What happened? That pushed the obligation down to Massachusetts and California and New York State. And we had to raise taxes to meet those needs, right? And the city of New York had to raise its taxes too high. What happens when you do that? You have cities and states raising real property and sales taxes and business taxes, okay? Then they get into competitions. New Jersey tries to reduce its tax lower than New York to take business from New York. New York tries to steal from Connecticut. They get into wars. You pit the states against one another. That's what happened for 11 years. That tension fragments the states and weakens the country. The Articles of Confederation, when we started this whole place, had the same problem. The articles of the states were warring with one another. So they sat down and they said, this is no good, we need a constitution. And the Constitution said, let's have a big treasury to solve these problems. We don't want the states beating up on one another that way. Let's have a federal treasury where we'll take one tax on everybody. This way you don't have to worry about New Jersey and Connecticut and New York fighting with one another, or the West has low taxes because they don't have a lot of poor people. So let's do as much evening out as we can from the federal government. Have a big income tax to the federal government and then distribute it as needed around the country. That makes sense. That makes it easier to, raise the revenues you need without pitting states against one another. Ironically, as we were being weakened by our fragmentation here, Europe was consolidating. That's what had happened to Europe. The Japanese, the Spanish were fighting with the Italians, were fighting with the French, the British. They all said, the heck with this. Let's beat up the Americans. Of course, now they're fighting with one another. They're in trouble economically. New York, New Jersey, Steinbrenner, the whole thing. So let's catch them. Let's all bring down our tariffs. Let's organize. In consolidation, there's strength. So we were coming apart, they were coming together to take advantage of our fragmentation. So what should we do? We should reduce the costs of all government. There's a lot of waste in government. I had a waste commission before the Grace Commission, before Gore and Clinton found $1,000 ashtrays. And all government has waste. Reduce the cost. Do only the things you should do. Get more intelligent participation by the federal government. There are some things the federal government should do. They should do all the health care, all the Medicaid. That should not be left to New York City and New York State. All the health care across the country, because there shouldn't be differences between New York and Tennessee. If you're in Tennessee, you can have a hysterectomy. If you're in New Jersey, you can't. It doesn't make any sense. So that should be evened out, and that, I hope, is what the health care reform will do. Will kind of even out those expenses. And when you even out those expenses, you are taking a lot of the burden off New York if you do it right. So I think there are certain things that the federal government should do. Obviously, armed forces, they should do across the board. You don't rely on your militia, although we all have independent militias. But this federal government has to be a more aggressive meter of the needs of revenues than it was under Reagan and Bush. Now, unfortunately, they left such a huge debt by the way they fouled things up that Clinton can't do a whole lot about evening it out right now. And you can't look for a lot of help from Clinton, except in this health care reform package, which I think could wind up being very good for New York State. Yes?
Governor, I'd like to thank you for your opposition to the death penalty, but do you ever feel that you would be more consistent if you would also oppose abortion on demand?
I don't see the relationship. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Back there, yes, ma'am. Yeah. The homeless issue. The homeless issue, my son Andrew did a big study on the homeless issue and arrived at a lot of conclusions. First, why does it exist? For a number of reasons. One part of that population just doesn't have shelter. You go at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'll find what I found, a young couple that was locked out of their apartment. They're not drug addicted. They're not troubled in any way. It's just a young couple that's homeless now because they were locked out of the apartment. They're unemployed. They have no apartment. They have no friends. They're from out of town. A woman with a daughter who was going, believe it or not, to the Bronx High School of Science and who had been in something like 9 shelters in 7 weeks. She seemed perfectly all right. She was unemployed. She's on welfare, no housing anywhere. So you have a certain percentage like that. You have a percentage, people say a third, a quarter, who knows, who are mentally ill, all right, and they need care. A lot of those people I find, Mayor Koch found, others found, you find them on the street. You try to help them. You try to lift them and put them into a program somewhere. They won't go. They're mentally ill. Some of them are drug abusers. A lot of them are drug abusers. I can't give you exact percentages. Andrew says it's a significant percentage, but how would you know? I mean, there's no way of taking a real census, so these are good guesses. So you have the drug addicted, you have the substance abusers, and the mentally ill. Some are mentally ill and drug abusers. One package. Now, here's what Andrew says about the homeless. And then there is a culture that's growing up. I mean, there's a culture of people who want to live out on the street. I mean, not because, they chose to reject a nice apartment from Louis Rudin and replace, and say, no, forget, I don't like Rudin, I'm going to sleep in the streets. It's not like that. But there is a kind of syndrome at work there. Here's what Andrew is saying. Not enough to give them shelter. Not enough to put them in the armories. Not enough to just keep them from freezing to death. Those that are especially troubled, you have to give special help to. If the problem is that this woman is unemployed, there surely must be a way to get her some kind of low-level employment that with the other assistance that you get, will allow them to find some kind of housing. The mentally ill have to be in programs for the mentally ill. You can't just put them in a shelter mentally ill. What are you achieving? First chance they get, they wander out. So, put the mentally ill into programs. Put the substance abusers into programs. Where do you get the money? It's very expensive. But the alternative is to have them all over the streets. And I'll tell you, This is an area where the federal government should help. Drug addiction is not a state problem. We do not produce cocaine in Queens. We do not grow heroin in the Bronx. You know, this comes from the rest of the world. It makes it past the federal authorities. This is a legitimate federal obligation. Drugs, drug addiction, drug treatment, all the expenses attached to it, all the criminal costs, this is a legitimate expense for the federal government. They not only do not meet the expense, let me tell you this, the crimes that are driving our budgeteers crazy, that are clogging our courts, all these drug crimes that our police are so busy doing that they don't have time to do some of their other work, that have the courts absolutely congested, virtually all of them are also federal crimes. They're in the federal book. It's called Title 18. Is that right, Fabian? Title 18, U.S. Code. The same crimes we're picking them up for. Drugs that got past the Army, past the Navy, past the Secret Service, past the FBI. Federal failure that they're here. The crime is committed outside the Y. Why does a city cop have to arrest them? Why can't the city cop, if he does arrest them, there should be marshals, right? Why don't the federal marshals do it? Okay, you make the arrest, take them to the United States Attorney's Office. Why do you have to take them to our DA? Let the federal system lock them up. That's a heck of a point, isn't it? You know what a big difference that would make? Put them in a federal prison. It's a federal crime, huh? No, let's stay with, you want to get back to Crown Heights. You guys have a real thing here with Crown Heights. I'll answer that, but let's stay with this point for a moment. This is a federal obligation. Why isn't the federal government doing it? Incidentally, Rudy Giuliani, to his credit, as United States Attorney, federal United States Attorney, made the same point I'm making and tried one day a month or something taking the arrests from the city police. And you know what happened? He got overwhelmed. He couldn't get any help from the federal government, and so he stopped doing it. You know what that means? The federal government is simply saying, there's no pressure for this. The public doesn't know anything about this. Only Mario knows, and Rudy knows. So forget about it. Let the city cops do it in city jails. Let them pay the price. Let the courts pay the price. Let your taxpayers, real property taxpayers, corporate taxpayers, income taxpayers from New York pay the whole price. So too with undocumented aliens. That's a federal failure. Why are they in our prison? I'm going to give you my frustration again, and the reason I published the book. It happens because nobody knows. You don't know. You don't know the jurisdiction, Title 18, etc. And because you don't know, the federal government gets away with it. And we pay the bill. I'll give you another one. Medicaid is a terrific cost to us. Billions of dollars. It's growing at like 12, 13% a year. Billions of dollars. Medicaid is paid half federal government, half state, okay? 50% federal government, 50% state. Did you know that? Okay. You know how much Tennessee gets? 82%. Why? Because there's a federal formula that says New York's a very rich state. Are you kidding? I'm rich? What are you telling me? Did you count up AIDS, homeless, crack, all the problems, all the people from around the country who are coming to New York whom we take care of? Is that in the formula? No, it's not in the formula. What does your own general accounting office say about that formula? My own general accounting office in Washington, federal office, says it's unfair. Well, then why didn't they change it? Because you had Reagan and Bush. They didn't want to change it. Can we change it now, Mario? 2 Fridays ago, I talked to Pat Moynihan. I said, Pat, we got the health care reform now, right? It's going to have to deal with Medicaid, right? President Clinton's going to give a statement, right? I said, let me tell you something, Pat. We can't come out of this paying 50%. We've got to get a break here. You know what happens? If they give us 3%, give us 6%, that's $1.5 billion. Forget it. If you gave us 80%, we'll declare dividends. They're not going to give us 80%. They're not going to give us 80%. That's too much. But here's a place where we can make some hay. Why didn't it happen? Because nobody knows. Nobody knows about the bridges. Nobody knows about the decade of the child. Nobody knows about any of these things. That's why we show up at the Y. That's why I did the book. That's why it's such a pleasure to talk to you, because you're one of the smartest audiences in the state. You are, let me tell you. I'm going to conclude. We're going to take one more question. All right, well, yes, go ahead. I spoke to the superintendent of insurance, Sal Coriali. I said, I want you to tell all the insurance companies they have to make insurance available for the shorefront people, everywhere from Fire Island all through this state. Give them a reasonable amount of time to do it. If they don't do it, tell them you're going to punish them by not allowing them to do other insurance work. He's made that statement. If they don't give you insurance, they'll be out of business in this state, okay? Now, I'm going to have to go because I promised that I would break at 9:30. Let me tell you this, really. This is a great, great city in a great state. This is a very special part of it, the why. The kind of discussion you had here tonight, and let's be honest, we could have it for another 4 or 5 hours. There's not a lot of places in America where you could put a group like this together, as bright, as interested, as vital, as candid, and as refreshing. It's always a joy to be with you. I published the book because I think that the ideas in the book are worth thinking about, and I don't know any other way to communicate them. They're all speeches that I wrote. You try to get them out, you read them once, and 400 people hear them, and then you put them in a drawer. It just occurred to me if I put them in a book, they might hang around for a little bit longer. They might get more people like you reading them, thinking about them, and doing something about them because there's a lot to be done. Thank you, and God bless you.